Hello everyone. Welcome to the introduction of new structural regional economics. In this lecture, we continue to see section 1 of chapter 1. Last class, we knew the population distribution on both sides of the Hu. So, is it because of the division made by such a line that the economic development of China's central and western region has been restricted? Let's take a look at the effectiveness of economic catch-up in the central and western regions. Indeed, in the view of population distribution, the law of economic and social development is very important. But that's not the whole picture. Only judging it from the spatial pattern of population distribution won't be enough to fully reflect China's economic development. As shown on the right, from the perspective of economic development scale, the absolute gap between the GDP of areas west of the Hu line and that of the areas east of the Hu line is indeed gradually expanding. Especially after 2000, the gap becomes more obvious. In 2018, the per capita GDP of the East was 96,000 yuan. The per capita GDP of the Central and West were 51,000 yuan and 49,000 yuan, respectively. It can be seen there is indeed a significant gap between two sides. So can the size of the economy reflect the real disparity in the economic development between both sides of the Hu line? Or does such a gap indicate that China's central and western regions cannot catch up? So, take one step further to analyze the issue from the perspective of economic growth rate. Seeing from the picture on the right that in recent years, the economic growth rates of the central and western region west of the Hu line has gradually surpassed that of the eastern regions, which states that the economic and social development of China's central and western region are relatively good. It's known that as the economic growth rate increases, the economic gap between the two will gradually narrow. The orange and gray curves on the right respectively represent the average economic growth rates of the central and western regions west of the Hu line. We could see that after 2010, their economic growth rates remain above 7%, exceeding the eastern region by 1% on average. If they continue performing like this, the central and western regions will definitely be on the way of catching up with the east. What's more, compared the ratio of per capita GDP of central and western region to that of eastern region, it can be found that the shares of the central and western regions decreased first, then increased. More specifically speaking, the per capita GDP of the western region in 1990 was only 50% of that of the eastern region. Then, in 2000, it fell to around 1/3 only. However, starting from 2018, per capita GDP of the western region began to increase rapidly, which has reached about 55% of that of the eastern region. This shows the economic growth in the central and western regions has indeed been chasing the east to a certain extent. From the changes in economic efficiency, We could also see if there is an economic catch-up in the areas west of the Hu Line. We're all familiar that according to the neoclassical growth theory, the economic growth of a region, especially the long-term one, is mainly driven by total factor productivity, TFP. The TFP growth rate and its contribution to economic growth determines the future economic differences between regions. Then, through the picture on the right, we could easily see the darker the color, the higher the TFP growth rate. Judging from the average growth rate from 1978 to 2013, the economic efficiency in China's central and western regions was overall showing a higher change rate than that in the east. This illustrates that the overall growth rate of the central and western regions west of the Hu Line will gradually exceed the eastern region. This is a vital potential force for economic growth in the central and western region. On the other hand, similar conclusions can be drawn from the perspective of changes in industrial structure. This picture presents us the regional differences in TFP changes in the primary industry. In the area west of the Hu Line, the average annual growth rate of TFP is about 2.21%. Its contribution rate to the economic growth of the primary industry is over 40%. The gap between that of the eastern region is actually very small, which means if the western region could maintain economic growth with this TFP growth rate, the relative difference it has compared to the eastern region would at least not expand. Okay, so how about the secondary industry? We know it's an industry of great significance that supports the development of a region. For the secondary industry, from 1978 to 2014, the average annual growth rate of TFP in the area west of the Hu Line reached more than 3%, and its contribution rate to economic growth was 25.7%, far exceeding that of the eastern region. Therefore, it is worth noticing that although the economic scale of the western region is still lagging behind the eastern region, its TFP growth rate and contribution rate have begun to surpass the eastern region, implying that its potential growth rate will gradually overtake the east. The absolute gap of the economic scale between the regions may show a trend of further narrowing. Of course, from the perspective of the tertiary industry, we won't deny in the area west of the Hu Line, due to the limitations of the economic development stage, the average annual growth rate of TFP is indeed relatively low. So is the contribution to economic growth. The gap between the growth rate of this particular TFP and that of the eastern region is relatively large. But to see it from a positive side, if the TFP of the tertiary industry in the central and western regions could be improved to a certain extent, it would again greatly promote the narrowing of the economic disparity within the central, western, and the eastern regions. Therefore, by learning this lecture, we realize that although China has a distinctive Hu Line in the natural geographical pattern, which delimits China's overall economic and social development, especially in the Central and Western region. The economic and social development in Central and Western regions still have made certain achievements in catching up with the East. It enlightens us that in the long run, the influences of the natural geographical environment may gradually decrease or even disappear. This also explains why China has been able to maintain rapid growth for some 40 years since 1978. In the end, here are some references for this lecture. Those who are interested may read them and find them useful. Okay, so that's all for Section 1. Hope you've got some basic understanding now about this mysterious yet magic Hu Lai. For sure, after learning this lecture, we know that China is gradually breaking through the Hu Lai to a certain extent. But why can it be broken through, thereby bringing China's continuous growth and prosperity? It's inseparable from China's regional development strategy. And that is what I'm going to introduce in the next lecture. Thank you.